I will never forget the sound that echoed down that white, silent hallway. It wasn't the constant beeping of the machines, nor the hurried shuffle of nurses' footsteps. It was a deep, almost purring sound that sent a chill through my whole body. I was sitting next to Mrs. Helena's bed when I heard it, and in that instant I realized the news had traveled much farther than anyone could have imagined. The hospital room door slowly swung open, and before anyone could stop it, that massive golden figure filled the doorway. It was as if the sun itself had entered the hospital. The lioness stepped forward slowly, gracefully, but with her eyes fixed on the woman lying in the bed, and I swear I had never seen so much recognition and emotion in an animal's gaze. Mrs. Helena, frail, with tubes and wires all over her body, gave a smile so gentle it seemed to come from another time. "My girl," she whispered, barely audible, and I knew right then that this story hadn't started that day. It had begun decades earlier, in the heart of a distant savannah, or rather, in the unlikely corner of a simple woman's life, but one with a giant soul. I remember when Helena told me about her first days with the lioness. She had been no more than a lost cub, found in the backyard of a farm, skinny and far too weak to survive alone. Poachers were already lurking, and the cub's mother was never found. Helena, who always had this gift for caring, picked up that fragile animal with trembling hands and said, "As long as I breathe, you will live." And she did live. She lived surrounded by affection, food, play, and a love that knew no boundaries. But life, as we know, isn't made of only happy days. When the lioness grew, Helena herself understood she couldn't keep her forever in a backyard. With tears in her eyes, she handed her over to a wildlife sanctuary, ensuring that even far away, she would be safe. And that was the day Helena told me something that still gives me chills. True love is the one that knows when it's time to let go. Years went by. The lioness grew, became the ruler of an entire territory within that sanctuary, respected and feared. But who could have guessed that one day, upon hearing her old friend was in the hospital, she would find a way to be there? The security guards were in shock, unsure whether to run or to let the scene unfold. I saw a nurse step back, and a doctor murmur, "This can't be happening." But it was, and it was impossible not to feel the weight of that moment. The air grew heavy, the hallway light seemed warmer, and each step of the lioness echoed on the polished floor like a solemn drum. When she reached the bedside, she tilted her head, as if asking for permission to come closer. Helena raised her hand, trembling, and touched her nose, gently, as if the moment were made of glass. And then the lioness closed her eyes, a moment of absolute silence. And in that silence I felt something shift. It wasn't just a reunion, it wasn't just longing. It was as if the lioness had come to retrieve something we didn't yet understand. I looked into Helena's eyes and saw a mix of peace and concern. It was as if she knew this visit wasn't just to say hello. And that's when things started to get strange. Tell me in the comments which city or country you're watching this from. And if this story has already touched your heart, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like and share. Because when we spread stories like this, we spread empathy, hope, and humanity. The lioness didn't move for what felt like an eternity. Her head rested near Helena's hand, eyes closed, breathing deep and slow. I could see her chest rise and fall, hear the faint rumble of her breath. No one dared to interrupt. It was as if the whole room had been pulled into another world, one where hospital walls didn't exist, where species and time didn't matter. But then Helena's fingers twitched, her touch becoming lighter, almost as if she was losing strength. I leaned closer, worried. The lioness's ears flicked back and her eyes opened, sharp, alert, reading every movement, every change in Helena's breathing. That's when I saw it. This animal wasn't just visiting. She was guarding. One of the doctors whispered behind me, "We need to get her out. This isn't safe." Another nurse replied, "Look at her. She's not here to harm anyone." And they were right. The lioness stood there like a sentinel, not a predator. Helena tried to speak, her voice breaking. "Do you remember?" she asked softly. The lioness tilted her head again, and something in her expression, yes, an animal's expression, seemed to answer. I thought back to the stories Helena had told me about nights spent sleeping next to a tiny, trembling cub, warming her with blankets, feeding her milk from a bottle. I realized then, this wasn't just memory. This was bond. But in the middle of that moment, a sound pierced the room, the distant blare of an alarm. At first, I thought it was from another ward, but it grew louder. The lioness's head jerked toward the hallway, muscles tensing. Something had shifted outside. The security team was gathering, and I caught a glimpse of two men with tranquilizer rifles moving closer. "Don't!" I said sharply, stepping into the doorway. "If you scare her now, someone will get hurt." But my voice was drowned out by the rising tension. The lioness growled, not loud but deep, enough to freeze everyone in place. Her body positioned itself between the bed and the door, as if she was willing to take on the entire hospital to protect Helena. I looked at Helena, and her eyes were clear, steady. "She knows," Helena whispered. "She can feel it. My time is close." Those words hit me like a punch to the chest. My throat tightened, but before I could answer, something completely unexpected happened. The lioness stepped closer to the bed, pressing her forehead gently against Helena's arm. Then she turned her gaze to me. For the briefest moment, I felt like I was being given a command, no, a responsibility. And then she backed away. Slowly, deliberately, she stepped toward the open doorway. The staff froze, waiting for her to bolt or attack. Instead, she stopped, looked over her shoulder at Helena one last time, and walked out into the hallway, her tail low but steady. No one spoke. The silence was heavier than before. I followed her into the corridor, but she was already moving faster now, her head low, her steps quiet but urgent. I didn't know where she was going, but I knew one thing. This wasn't the last time we'd see her. Because as she disappeared through the hospital's main doors, she left behind something I couldn't explain. And I was starting to believe that the unbelievable part of this story hadn't even begun. I stood frozen at the hospital entrance, watching the lioness disappear into the bright afternoon light. For a moment, I wondered if I should follow her, but my body wouldn't move. It was like my mind was still trying to process what had just happened. Then, from somewhere deep in my gut came a pull. I had to see where she was going. I jogged out the front doors, ignoring the shouts from the security guards telling me to stay back. The sunlight hit my face, and I caught sight of her golden shape moving, with that unmistakable fluid grace, weaving between parked cars. She wasn't running, but she wasn't wandering either. Every step looked like it had a purpose. I followed at a distance, careful not to startle her. She crossed the hospital parking lot and headed toward a patch of open land behind a row of small shops. The further we went, the quieter it got. No traffic noise, no chatter. Just the sound of my own breathing and the faint rustle of dry grass under her paws. And then she stopped. We were standing in front of an old fence, half broken, surrounding a forgotten field. The kind of place people pass by without even noticing. But she noticed. She slipped through a gap in the fence, and I hesitated before crawling through after her. On the other side, the air felt different, warmer, heavier. I realized why when I saw them. Two small shapes hidden in the shade of a collapsed wooden shed. Cubs. Two lion cubs. They were barely bigger than a house cat, eyes wide and unsteady on their paws. One of them let out a soft, almost pitiful cry. My chest tightened. It was impossible not to feel the weight of what I was seeing. The lioness walked straight to them, nuzzling each one gently. Then she turned to look at me, and I swear, there was meaning in that look. It wasn't just, "These are mine." It was, "These are yours too now." I took a step forward, but she moved to block me. Not aggressively, but with a clear message. Not yet. That's when I realized. She had left Helena not because she was done, but because there was something she needed to prepare for, something bigger. But before I could make sense of it, a distant sound shattered the moment, the low hum of an engine. I turned my head and saw a truck approaching from the far end of the field. Its paint was chipped and the bed was covered with cages. My stomach sank poachers. The lioness's muscles tensed, her ears flattening against her head. The cubs pressed themselves against the remains of the shed. And I stood there, heart pounding, caught between fear and the certainty that I couldn't just walk away. The truck slowed, then stopped. Two men stepped out, their eyes locking on the lioness. One of them grinned and reached for something in the back. I knew then, if I didn't act fast, this reunion would turn into a tragedy. The two men from the truck were moving slowly, like predators themselves, trying not to spook the lioness. One had a long, battered rifle slung over his shoulder. The other carried a metal cage, its door swinging loosely with a metallic rattle. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. The lioness stood her ground, her tail flicking in sharp, tense movements. She wasn't backing away. But I also knew if they had a firearm, one wrong move could end this in seconds. The taller man chuckled under his breath. "Looks like we just got lucky," he said, his voice carrying across the field. The other one grinned. "3 for the price of 1. His eyes darted to the cubs, my hands curled into fists. I didn't have a weapon, I didn't even have a plan. But I had one thing, time, or at least a few seconds of it. The lioness growled low, deep in her chest. It was a sound that didn't just warn, it promised. The cubs whimpered, pressing closer to the old shed, and I realized they were trapped. The fence we had slipped through might as well have been a wall to them. One of the men raised his rifle. "Don't!" I shouted, stepping forward without thinking. "You fire that thing here, you'll hit me too!" They hesitated just for a moment, sizing me up. "Step aside," the one with the cage said flatly. I didn't move. My heart was hammering, but I forced my voice to stay steady. "That lioness, she's mine." I didn't know why I said it, but it worked. Confusion flickered in their eyes. "She's been tracked. If you take her, they'll find you before you're halfway out of here." The taller one sneered. "You think we care?" But he didn't fire. The lioness used that hesitation like a weapon. She stepped forward, placing herself fully between the men and the cubs. Her body was rigid, every muscle ready to spring. I could feel the air tighten, like the second before a lightning strike. Dramatic pause. That's when I realized, if this went bad, the cubs wouldn't survive. And Helena, she didn't even know they existed. I needed to get the men away from here. Fast. I took a slow step forward, my hands raised. "All right," I said. "You want her? She won't leave the cubs, but there's a bigger one out by the road. I saw it on the way here. You take that one, you'll make more money." The shorter man glanced at his partner. They were hesitating. That was all I needed. From the corner of my eye, I saw the lioness glance at me. Not for long, just a fraction of a second, but it felt like understanding. The men muttered something to each other, then turned toward the truck. I didn't breathe until the engine coughed to life and the vehicle began to roll away, dust trailing behind. When the sound of the engine faded, the field fell silent again, except for the faint whimper of the cubs. The lioness turned back to them, touching each one with her nose. Then she looked at me. This time, there was no mistrust, only something deeper. I knew what it meant. She needed my help. And as much as I wanted to believe this was over, in my gut, I knew this was just the begin. The lioness stood over her cubs, her breathing calm now, the tension in her body easing. I stepped closer, slow and careful, until I was only a few feet away. The cubs peeked out from behind her legs, tiny, wide-eyed, still trembling from the encounter. I crouched down, my voice low. "We need to move them. It's not safe here." The lioness didn't growl. She didn't block me. Instead, she stepped aside, her eyes locked on mine. It was permission. I scooped the first cub into my arms. It was warm and surprisingly light, its small heartbeat fluttering against my chest. The second one followed, curling against its sibling as I held them both close. The lioness walked ahead of me, leading the way back through the fence, across the open lot, and toward the road. But instead of heading toward the sanctuary, she turned toward the hospital. At first I thought it was impossible, bringing wild cubs into a building full of people. But then it hit me. She wasn't just taking them anywhere. She was taking them to Helena. By the time we reached the hospital entrance, the security guards were speechless. I think they were too stunned to even argue. The lioness walked straight down the same hallway she had entered hours earlier, her paws silent against the floor. When we reached Helena's room, the old woman's eyes widened. Her frail hands trembled as she reached out. "Oh, my girl, you brought them." Her voice cracked and tears filled her eyes. I gently placed the cubs on the bed beside her. They sniffed her hands, one of them even nuzzling her wrist. The lioness stood at the foot of the bed watching, her tail swaying slowly. It was then that Helena told me the truth. The lioness hadn't just been her companion all those years ago. She had been rescued from the very same poachers who had taken her first litter of cubs. Helena had never stopped wondering if that loss had stayed with her. And now, seeing her with these two, she knew. "They're her second chance," Helena whispered. The room was silent except for the soft purr-like rumble from the lioness. She lowered her head, touching her forehead to Helena's hand. And in that moment, it felt like something unspoken passed between them. A promise, a farewell, and a thank you all at once. The lioness didn't stay long. She knew her cubs were safe now. She turned, gave me one last look that I'll never forget, and walked out of the room. I watched her golden shape disappear down the hallway, her shadow stretching across the floor until it was gone. Helena closed her eyes, still smiling. "She's free now," she murmured. And for the first time that day I realized she wasn't just talking about the lioness, because sometimes the most incredible part of a story isn't what you see, it's what it changes inside you.